Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my YouTube channel, The Rookie Fashion Icon. So today I'm going to show you guys how to make a fluffy quilted purse, and here I'm using goat skin because it's really soft and it's really how would I say, pliable, and it's something you could easily replace with a fabric, so you don't really have to use leather. And today I'm using my domestic sewing machine. So this is the template I made, and for the sides I measured 14 centimeters for the base and 48 centimeters all around it, so it's going to help me when I'm cutting out the fabric, the skin. So I'm just going to trace out my template carefully and I'm drawing right on it, but when I'm done I'm going to take another 1 centimeter all around, and this is so when I'm sewing it, I don't sew into the measurements I already made. So this one is what we call allowance. So I'm going to cut that out and trim all the excess. And for the sides, I'm actually measuring 10 centimeters, but I'm going to further split into two because I want to sort of put a zip in the middle. So I'm just going to cut this out and set it aside. And I'm using the polka dot fabric for the lining just to give it some extra bourgeois. So I'm just going to cut that out too and set aside. So here is the main deal. This is the quilting. I'm using half centimeter thick foam, and I'm just going to put some satin fabric at the back, so when I'm sewing the foam doesn't sort of stretch out or disfigure the main piece. So I'm just marking out some lines. I'm using a leather pen, so it's easy for me to just wipe off when I'm done. So I didn't have any specific measurement for the quilting, so I just have 2 ruler rolls diagonally. So that's what I'm just going to sew on when I am quilting. So I'm just going to mark that out and I'm just going to spread it. Now you see why I left like so much allowance around, so that when I'm doing this I have an abundance of foam to work with. We want it to be as fluffy and as wide and spread out as possible. So I'm just going to sew on the lines I already made on both sides. I'm doing the same thing for the back and the front, and I'm actually using a Teflon foot. It's sort of like a plastic, and that's it's usually what I use when I have to sew leather or any sort of rubberized material. So it just sort of slides over it. It doesn't hang like the normal steel foot we have. So this is one piece that I'm done with. And right before I trim out the edges, I'm just going to go round as close as possible to the edge. You don't want this to get into the main piece, so just sew it all around. So when you trim it, you don't have like this weird puffiness around your piece. So there it is, all stitched out. Oh, I love the shade, it's so pretty. So I'm just going to trim on both pieces. I'm going to trim out the excesses. So we have a solid front and back piece. Trim, 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 trim. So now that I'm done with this, okay, as usual, trim out the threads, and just for, I don't know, no reason, just to decorate, I'm going to use gold rivets, but you have to understand that at this point I was taking a risk. You can easily use studs or glue on some stones, but I didn't have any of those. So I just sort of punched holes and and placed rivets to make like an upside down diamond shape, I think, just to make it fancy, so you know where's the front and where's the back. So I'm going to go punch, 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 hit them down in place with my rivet setter. And I went back to the sewing machine and I just covered the back so you don't get the quilting pattern on both sides, you have it just one side. So now this is important. This is me making the sides, and I'm sort of making it's this weird sandwich. You have the wrong side of the upper part facing up, and you have the right side of the lining facing up. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can see it here. So I'm going to pin it down and show you what it's going to look like if I stitch this. So when you sort of open it, you see it sort of flips the right side up, and because you're lining, you want the right side to face down. I don't know what I'm saying. So I'm just going to stitch all that, and I'm doing the same thing for both sides, and it's kind of rough now. I always like to have like excess when I'm working, so I can easily just trim that off. So normally you're supposed to stitch this, but because I want to have this fine finish, I'm just going to use some contact glue right on the point that I sewed, and I'm going to do the same thing for both sides. So when you're folding it back, it's really smooth and it's straight. I just did not want to see a stitch line around my zip. I just wanted it to be this fluffy, cute pink purse. I just wanted only the quilting to show and not this part. So I'm just going to go press it all around on both sides to make sure it's totally secure and as flat and as cute as possible. Sorry for my finger, I'm always injuring myself when I'm working. I know my sister hates it, but sorry, occupational hazard. So I'm going to go and I'm doing the same thing for both sides. You can see it's coming out pretty neat, pretty nice. And yeah, just going to give that a little finer finish with a hammer. So now I'm marking out the 48 centimeters. Actually it's 50 because I added 1 centimeter on both sides. So I'm just going to stitch out exactly what I want, and I'm doing it all around the piece so we have one solid piece. We don't have sides dangling everywhere. So this way it's easy to work with what you're doing, especially if you're using a lining that is fabric. So I'm just going to stitch that all around. Stitch, 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 stitch. And that's it. So I trimmed out the parts that I didn't want. So now I'm doing the same thing, the same method I used to sew the zip. So you put the lining at the bottom, right side up. You put the outside, the outer material using face down. Then this one I'm putting a little foam, so the foam is the lowest point. So you've got from bottom to top, you have foam, you have lining, you have whatever piece you want to join to, and then you have your outermost piece, whether it's fabric or leather or anything. As long as it's something that you know if you flip, it's not going to be too bulky, then yes. So I'm just going to pin that, and you see I already marked out the 1 centimeter line that I'm going to follow, because everything has to be correct down to the last measurement. So I'm just going to sew that in, and you need to be careful because I'm using an iron zip. If you're using plastic zip, you could just sew right through it, but with iron zip you have to be careful. If not, you're going to break your needle and, or worse, lock up your machine, spoil something inside. So I'm just going to skip the zip and sew right through it on the line that I already measured out. And I'm doing the same thing for the other side, but because the upper part is way longer, so I'm just going to like sort of fold it so it's going to contain. If you had like a 50-50 thing, the bottom and the top sort of joins at the middle, then you don't really have to do this. But because the base is literally just the base, you get the 14 I think 14 centimeters, so I had to really squeeze this in so that I could do my the joining for the second part. And you have it foam, lining facing up, the piece you want to join it to, then you've got the right side facing down, and we're going to have the voila moment shortly. So just do that. And yeah, the same thing, I didn't want to flip it and stitch it, so I'm just going to glue it because it's, trust me, it's way easier that way and it's way neater. So just put some glue on the two sides, enough glue so you know when you fold it in. So you're talking about at least 1.5 centimeter gluing. Just glue, and I tried to do this but it didn't work, so I just turned it inside out, and voila, you've got one piece seamless. So I'm just going to go first press down the glued area on both sides. Make sure they're as wide as spread out as possible, so this way you don't have any stitching showing on the inside or the outside. You've got everything tucked into itself. So same thing I'm going to do for the sides here. I'm going to stitch down the ends, so it doesn't really look uniform now because I've got like allowance everywhere. So now this is important. You want to make sure that the length of your side is the circumference. I mean, yeah, the circumference of the front and the back. So even if it doesn't measure out here, you can still go back to your sewing machine and just sew out a little more and trim it until it's exactly the same size, because it has to match. If it doesn't match, it's not going to actually work out. So I did some adjusting after on, but I was able to get the desired shape that I want. So I'm just going to pin that down and take it for stitching. So while I'm doing the first stitching, I sort of have this technique where I use this I would call it a ribbon, but it's much thicker than that. It's sort of made out of some sort of I don't want to say nylon or silk, but this is actually called binding method, where you just sew. I use it like a bias, something like that. The idea is to hide the open edge here. So I'm just going to sew on an average my 1 centimeter. So all that allowance I was drawing and cutting and making room for was so that when you start sewing this, you can easily do this and trim when you're done. So I'm just going to go around on the 2 sides. I'm going to stitch down the tape and sew it with the edge. So this is the first step of the closing the sides. Then I'm going to go back, then I flip it on itself, just the way a bias would normally work, and I just sew it all around, all over again. So technically I'm sewing it twice, and this is what it's going to look like. Trim, trim, trim. And yeah, it's much better than having your loose threads hanging around. Trust me, it's way better. So I'm just going to flip it inside out and push out any parts, pull out any threads, trim, do literally any finishing touch that I want. And this is sort of not really necessary, but I just wanted to see if you could make a difference. So I just took my rubber hammer and I just like bit the sides to help it flip out a little bit more. Oh, I can't wait to rock this purse.